Hi, I'm Bowen Yang, and welcome to Search Party, the podcast, brought to you by iHeartRadio and HBO Max. Think of this as an audio companion to the dark comedy series that you can't help but binge watch. The theme of today's podcast is victimhood and trauma. Now, admittedly, these might not sound like the funniest topics on paper, but luckily I'm joined by two very smart, sensitive, and funny people to discuss them. Boy, are you in for a treat today. We're joined by one of the show's co-creators, Sarah-Violet Bliss, and actor, comedian, and Search Party superfan, Paul Scheer. This is a conversation that is a testament to Search Party's ability to boldly go where no show has gone before. So let's take the leap together and listen. Hello, how are you?
I am so excited to be here. I am such a huge, huge fan of this show. It's so good. It's so good.
You and me both. Wow.
Cannot wait to talk about this.
Hi, SV. How's it going?
Good.
Good. The theme of today's episode is victimhood and trauma. Normally, I like to ask our guests how the theme of the episode has related to their lives in the past week, but I feel like, this is so heavy. But let's just ask, what has been an instance recently where you have felt like a victim, but maybe weren't really? I mean, you were kind of just doing victim drag. Does that make sense? I can go first. I thought that a nose pore strip on my nose was doing too much pulling. And I felt like the product was bad, but I felt like I had been slighted in that purchase, but I think I just probably left it on too long. So I wasn't actually a victim in that case.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. SV, what about you? What's an example of false victimhood that you've taken on lately?
Oh
as
gosh.
A mantle?
Okay, here's where I'm a victim.
Yes.
Did you hear that? My phone.
You have a landline?
I have a landline, which I got because my phone service sucks.
Yeah.
And all morning it's been ringing.
Who has this number?
No one has this number. It's just freaking, spam calls. When you get a landline, the only person who calls you is spam. And that's the way I'm a victim. And I got it so that when my reps call me and it's too many people on the phone, then I cannot hear or understand anyone. I'm like, I can't, my cell phone can't handle conference calls, which is all I'm doing right now.
Of course.
So that's the sole purpose that I got this landline, and all morning it's been
just ringing off the hook. That sounds distressing, and you might actually be a victim in that case. Paul, what about you?
I've been quiet because I'm trying to wrap my head around where I have done this, and I know I do it constantly, and I feel like I love my wife. We have a great relationship, but I am constantly blaming her for whatever comes up that is going to, pull me off center. Like, she didn't put gas in our car the other day, and I was late for something. And I was late because I was late. Like, I needed to get gas as well, but
Sure.
I really leaned into the fact that she didn't put gas in the car when she knew that it needed gas. I would have been 4 minutes late if it was just that, and I was 25 minutes late. So, but I really, when I told that story, I was like, and I got in the car, and I hadn't been driving it, and my wife, she didn't put it in. And I find myself becoming like an episode of Everyone Loves Raymond when I'm just like, oh, my wife.
Oh, yeah.
And I hate that about myself because I don't feel that way. But it also is so society, it's acceptable to complain about your husband or your wife or your partner, whoever you have. Feel like, yep, I get it. And so it's sort of and they're not guilty. And I'm sure I've been blamed many times and I'm not guilty either. But yes, my wife takes a brunt of the public blame. I'm really throwing her under the bus. And, and I felt bad about it. I really did.
Well, the reason I framed the question in terms of a false victimhood, self-inflicted position to sort of take on is I feel like that is my big takeaway of Search Party as a show, just in its entirety. And as a viewer, as a fan of the show, the thing that always hits me and I'm so like in awe of is this way that it portrays all these different illustrations of victimhood that is either like warranted or not, that ends up creating more problems or just rippling out in these like destructive ways, I would say. I mean, maybe I'm like drilling a little too deep on this.
I think that you're really, I had this realization the other day in thinking about doing this show and knowing what the topic was. Something occurred to me, which was like, everyone is writing their own stories, right? And they've created their own way that other people view them and their different relationships. And it's so easy just to continue to tell that story. Like there's, a person in my family, like they have a story that they tell and it is nonstop. And it's sort of like, yes, I hear what you're saying. It's like there's a victim blaming, but you can create your own narrative. And in that world, it's like a television show. You are just going to hit those same beats. It's like a sitcom. It resets everything. You're always going to be doing that. And it's so easy to get wrapped up in your character and your relationship to another character in your life. It's a shorthand that you don't have to like worry about changing. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Totally. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
SV, what do you make of that?
I mean, I totally agree with that and how you just need to particularly like reframe everything so that you're the hero in every situation. And so like, especially when you know that you've done something that feels bad, you're like, well, okay, but in that situation though, like I wouldn't have done that bad thing if they hadn't done that. Like you have to like create a narrative that makes you not a bad guy.
Well, do you think that also, and I don't want to bring this show to too serious of a moment, but I think that victim blaming goes on in a lot of the events that we're seeing in the world as well, right? Mm-hmm. Like to justify something horrible, we must paint a picture that makes it, but this is why it happened. We have to create this narrative and we have to blame victims, or we have to say, well, if they didn't do that, or if they didn't do this, it wouldn't have happened like that. If they just, and I think a lot of the times like this divide that we have culturally or politically is, some people are just saying like, we need to look at it from like a justice standpoint. And other people are like, but you got to fill in all the facts. And it makes them able to take how horrible something is, because if you put these like false equivalencies on things and you find ways to make that person wrong, then you can be right, or you don't have to address something like that. I mean,
right. Yeah. It's all self-preservation. I feel like that's sort of the broad application that I think we can pair with this idea of victimhood. But I mean, let's just talk about Dory as the hero of this story. I mean, is she a victim? Does she think she's a victim? She's obviously been through trauma. Whether she's on the administering end of that trauma or the receiving end is, I think, up for debate. But I think there's this big question in the show about whether or not she is actually afflicted by something, if she is the victim of her circumstances. What do we think?
I mean, I don't think that she, is the victim of her circumstances. I think that she made choices that brought her to where she is. And she's trying to, particularly in season 3, trying to present a story to convince people that my story could be your story, and how scary would it be for you if it were presented in that way. Whether or not she's a victim is like, she made her choices. Like,
sure.
I guess,
Well, actually, why don't we just watch the clip that SV brought? This is from Dory's closing statement in the season 3 finale.
I know that the evidence doesn't look good. I mean, even I look at the police reports and think, oh yeah, this girl is guilty. But I didn't do it. The police reports don't tell the full story. It's all a fabrication. I can't know how or why our DNA ended up in places that it shouldn't be, and I wish I had a better answer for that, but I just don't. And I can't know something that I don't know, and I can't make up answers because that wouldn't be the truth. But what I didn't know is that it is so scary. What can happen when you are in the wrong place at the wrong time? I cry every day. because I'm just so afraid of what's going to happen to me. We are victims of circumstance. Me and Keith. I don't even know who I am anymore. All I know is that inside, I'm just a little girl who wants to go home. Please, 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 I'm just begging you. I'm begging you to send me home. Just please send me home.
Wow. I mean, you hear it in that clip where she says, we're just victims of circumstance. And the frame around it the whole time is she is saying, I don't know why our DNA was on evidence. I don't know why this happened or that happened or why I'm here even. But what I do know is that I am suffering. What I do know is that I am lost and broken. What I do know is that I kind of am a victim. I mean, and this is this cathartic moment in the season where it's belied by the fact that Dory isn't even really authentic in this emotional release, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's like she's doing an incredible job selling this story to them. And I think she's selling everyone as a victim in it.
Yeah.
Everyone, including people who weren't involved in the story. Like, imagine if you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, which is not what happened even.
But is it also like, I mean, I know that she's obviously not being authentic, but at the same time, she's also expressing this feeling of, I brought this stuff on myself, so that has created a level of guilt and trauma in my life. And now I'm going to tell you that what you were saying, like the idea that, oh, that's what I'm reacting to. Like I know that I'm upset. I know that I can't sleep at night. It's sort of like not acknowledging the first part. Like I brought this on myself and now I feel this way. It's sort of like you're eliminating the first part. I mean, and again, this is tricky because it's not fully true. It's, know, but I think that energy is such a victim energy of like, I got myself into this mess and I'm upset about being in this mess, but I'm not looking at why I created the mess.
Yeah. I mean, the whipsaw to all of this is that this would have all been avoided if Dory was honest about the way this all happened, which was that she was being threatened, which in that case, she really was.
Well, let me ask you both this. Would you have done it differently? Because I think one of the things that's so amazing about this show is you get why the decision was made, right? It doesn't seem, it seems like, okay, we can maybe do this. And I know it's crazy. And I'm not saying that that's how I feel, but I see her point of view as being rational in that moment. Or maybe, am I absolutely insane for saying that? Maybe I'm
no.
But I mean,
No.
I've never been in that situation, but there is something about it that one little thing builds into another little thing. Like I read this article about like white lies and how white lies can kind of just start to build on each other. And then by the time you get to where it gets, it's so big. But the beginning one is, okay, this is maybe manageable or something.
Right. Because, but that's a huge point though, Paul, because I feel like the seed crystal of the lie that she tells people is that Chantal is this very close friend of hers. And then everything else just builds on that lie because Dory is this unmoored person when we first meet her. She doesn't really know.
It gives her life meaning in a weird way. Like this whole journey puts a rudder on her ship. I don't know if she needs it or if that's something that you all talked about in the writer's room. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets to a point where it's too humiliating to go back. Like, it's so much happens that she just gets so buried in shame, and then she has to own it in a certain way. And then this becomes more powerful. Like she's actually doing such a good job in this scene.
Yeah.
It's like she's good at it. She crosses over into transcending her shame into being like, I'm now becoming empathetic. Like before I was becoming like so spiraling down into my shame, and now I've come up the other side of it into someone who it's like now people are empathizing with me on the end of like, oh, like now she's a victim. Like before it was she was a predator or whatever. Like she was a
Does she become soulless? I mean, is that part of it? Like, these people who we have in the real world, like they become these awful people, but then they are awful people that then can become hucksters and sell themselves as being innocent. I think we see that a lot in society. Like, people who can kind of make that turn, and then we embrace them. But there's also that idea that we know that it may be a little bit shady, but we are almost on their side. Like, I mean, I feel like she does cross over. She loses a bit of herself to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of this moment here is like, she's turned.
Yeah, I mean, there is that scene right before this where she has to like kill a piece of herself in order to be able to do this. And when writing this, there was I watched so much Dateline. There's this one episode which this woman who seduced her 15-year-old student, and she was like 34. It was just so fascinating, this episode, because there was just so much evidence against her, so much text messaging between them. She tried to flip the case so that she was the victim of this, like, so that she was like, look at this piece of evidence where it's like, you sent him this picture of you topless that said like, come over later or whatever. And she was just like, what you don't understand is that if I didn't send him that, then he was going to come over that night and rape me. And like, I was just like, that's how it was. Like, that's how much control he had over me. And like, my whole life, I've just always been so like shy and taken advantage of. And like, you should understand that like as a woman that we're like, really, like she tried to play all these, like my dad's so proud of me for finally like standing up for myself. Like I could have taken the plea bargain, but I didn't because I wanted to stand up for what's right by not taking the plea bargain. You know, like she really, and it's like actually one of my favorite Dateline episodes because she's so completely she's a sociopath, incapable of admitting that she did this thing.
That's so frightening.
It's so frightening. The prosecutor is so frustrated. She like goes to Polly level. Like she's just like, I've never seen anyone this insane. Like she just is like, she's like, never in my life, in my career, like have I had someone make the victim the predator in this situation. And there's like within the text message, like all her friends are like, yeah, no, she did it. You know, like all her friends like don't want to be on the stand or just like, I'm sorry, but she texted me all this stuff. And there's like this one thing that's so Search Party in it where like you see the text messages where she's like, I'm dating a guy. You're not going to believe it. He's 15. And the friend responds, "Squeeze me."
Oh, man.
That's very Search Party.
Yeah. Anyway.
You know, I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and it's been amazing to watch them kind of fall into these patterns of whenever they do something wrong, their first instinct is to create a situation where they are immediately not wrong. Like the other day, and that's a very, I think it like, I think we learn this so early on, right? Like my 6-year-old is not a violent kid. He's like a very well-behaved kid, but he threw like a soda can at his brother. And I was like, Gus, like, why did you throw the soda can at him? And he's like, oh, because I thought he was going to throw a can at me. So I was protecting myself. And the 4-year-old is sitting there coloring. There is no can near him, but he created this elaborate story about how it was in self-defense of himself. And it's like, and where is that from? Nowhere. Like, this is a 6-year-old kid who has created a story that he did this out of self-defense. And I was laughing because it was completely made up. And you see it on like another of my favorite, like To Catch a Predator, like when they would bring those people on and they get them. Hey, here are your text messages. Here's what you said. We just watched you say this shit. And they're like, oh, but I didn't. Here's the thing. And it's like the immediate response. I think whenever you're caught, for the most people, it's like spin, 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 spin. And
yeah,
and it's,
totally.
And I guess I've just been amazed at watching it so early. Like to see a 6-year-old spinning it, I'm like, wow, like who taught you that? It's innate, I think, on some level, you know?
It is because Paul, with what you were saying earlier about how it's a societal thing to shift blame or not take responsibility or become defensive. I think it's like a limbic brain thing. I think it's just like an evolutionarily programmed thing where you are prey.
Right.
And you have to protect yourself at all costs. And like, it's just a thing that we cannot escape as human beings until we like reach the singularity and evolve out of this or whatever.
Well, I think that there are like two types of people too. Like, I think you're right. Like, I think that people view themselves as being prey. And I think that's probably more the people that we all probably surround ourselves with. And then there are some people like when you go like, wow, I wish I had the self-confidence of this person. Because sometimes you'll watch someone just take it on and be unabashed and just like, yep, that's what I said. That's what I did. And I mean it. You know, it's like when confronted with, you know, that hurt or whatever, I got into this with a parent at my PTA board. Like, he came after me super hard because I had kind of called him out on something. And instead of just taking the moment of like where I was trying to come and reach to him as like a nice person and be like, hey, look, I think we should maybe like look at this. He just took an incredibly defensive position and was like, as a matter of fact, I'm not wrong. You're wrong. And I was like, oh, wow, to have the confidence of, you know, I don't know, to kind of stand up to it. So maybe, I guess it is the same thing, but one is like an active, like, I'm not the victim here. It switches the power. I don't know.
Sure.
I've seen that too. Like, it's a different way of doing it, but I guess it is deflecting, you know, to a certain extent.
After this quick break, we'll continue discussing the themes of victimhood and trauma in the context of Search Party with Sarah-Violet Bliss and Paul Scheer.
I was going to ask you a question. Like, when you first started working on this show, did you know that this was the story that you wanted to tell, at least in the broad strokes? Like, I think when I first started watching it, I wouldn't have expected it to be where it is now necessarily from the first couple of episodes. You know?
Yeah, no, it evolved as we were writing it. So we knew how we wanted the first season to end, and we were like, not sure what season 2 is going to be. Is it going to continue to be like a mystery show or what, you know? And then season 2 was the hardest season to write by far, because that was like we were redefining the show. And then we realized, we can keep redefining it each season. So no, we didn't know where we were going. And now that we know we can evolve it the way we evolve it, we feel the show takes us where it's meant to go, you know, that sort of thing.
I wanted to ask about this moment in season 3 where Dory is talking to her parents. Well, she's lashing out at them by the end of the episode, where she's like, you know, I don't want to be eating shrimp cocktail in a mall in Albuquerque because that's my nightmare. But beyond that, it's like she is basically saying that she lives in New York, is sort of creating a distance as a protective measure because she was kind of just miserable where she came from. I mean, is that like another instance of her justifying her narrative by way of positioning herself as someone who's been slighted or wronged in the past, or traumatized even by her upbringing? Like, was that like a conscious thing, like in terms of like Dory as a character hating where she's come from?
I think that she didn't know what her purpose was, but she knew what she didn't want. You know, it was like trying to get away from this banality. And I know that I want to be something greater. And I don't know what that is. And that's why she seeks out this excitement and this something bigger. Something is calling to her and she's not sure what it is, but she wants to feel some importance. And there's a moment in the season where she's starting to feel, people think I'm important, and she's liking the attention.
Exactly.
And so she's liking the fame. So there's something there that's like getting her entangled in the wrong area here, but
right.
It's attractive to her.
I feel like that's sort of true for all 4 of the main characters, where you have I mean, Elliot sort of being pathological, like, and that tilt of just being like, of just lying all the time in order to control his narrative self. And then you have Portia, who is trying to not be implicated as much as she can by confessing, but she is sort of painting herself as in some way as the victim by being like, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time too. And then you have Drew, who is trying to like revise his history in a way by like going back to Chicago and like throwing away this tape of him killing a swan. Like, I mean, yeah, like how do we feel about the way that everybody thematically position themselves as someone who is being afflicted?
Is there something about it maybe being unconscious that we all feel like we can't have any mark on our past, right? We are a country or a culture that you need to be all one way or the other. We don't really accept a change of ideology so easily or action, so it's like you have to recreate yourself to be viewed differently in a way. So it's like, I think each one of them is trying to be like, that's not me, this is now me. And this is, instead of embracing like, yes, that was me and I'm trying to be better. It's sort of like, instead of like climbing on top of yourself, you're kind of eradicating an old self. Again, it's spinning, but I think it's jettisoning anything that reminds you of that old you. And then whether or not that sticks is a whole other thing. But I think that that's a natural instinct to like strip yourself of that other thing without actually examining and actually taking who you are and making it better.
Sure.
Yeah. And just that they're going to use anything to shame you. So like they're going to use anything from his past as proof for evidence that's happening now.
Right. But it takes like a deep self-awareness and like an awareness of your own personal history to do what Drew did, I think.
Yeah.
Just to be like, oh my God, one time when I was a kid, I did this and I have to go destroy the evidence.
See, no, I think that in a weird way, it's because you're looking at everything. Well, yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, I guess you have to be aware, but I also feel like, don't you do that? Like, don't you go through a mental Rolodex of things like, oh my gosh, I never did this or I did that. Yeah, exactly. Right. And so I feel like that's what in that moment, like what he's kind of doing too, is like, what can be ammunition? What can be fuel? And like I mean, it's kind of what you do in therapy too. Like you kind of pop back and be like, oh my God, I never remembered that. And it's
right.
And that is like a physical manifestation of something. Like a lot of the times it's more internal, but it's like, I don't know. I feel like everyone has those deep-seated things. They know it may have been wrong or they know it's there. There's something about it. I thought it was really,
There's one clip that I want to play. This is from season 1. This is when the friends go to Chantal's vigil and sort of it might sort of be the first instance where they insert themselves into this narrative. And it's just so interesting and so funny. So let's watch it.
We'd like to thank everyone so much for coming out tonight for Chantal. The amount of love
you guys, her mom looks so sad.
This last week it's been extraordinary.
I'm going to tell the parents.
Linda and I thank you.
Oh, no, I don't think that's a very good idea.
No, it's just, how can I let them mourn like that when I know that she's alive?
Don't mourn it.
Okay.
I think you should tell them.
Now we have a very special performance from Chantal's college a cappella group, the Choral Fixation.
5, 6, 7, 8. Here's the thing, we started out friends. It was cool, but it was all pretend. Yeah, yeah, since you've been gone.
So that vigil, I think, is one of the bigger sort of set pieces of the whole series, I would say. I mean, there's just so much that happens there. I would say it kind of catalyzes the whole journey of the first season, but talk about what you went into that scene with in the writer's room.
First of all, that tone was like, oh my God, I hope we get this right, because I don't want it to feel like we're making fun of people who have gone missing, but
yeah.
It's like the point is to try to get that feeling of like when people want to insert themselves on other people's trauma and be like, I knew them, and like I have the most trauma around this, and like I'm the victim here, or like
yeah.
And not that there's, you do long for connection when you have had some part in this, but when they sing the "Since You've Been Gone" tribute,
funny.
it's also like tone deaf, but also, it's like
it's a funhouse mirror version of like what we all do in these instances where we want to like layer on meaning in the way that we know how. And it's like, oh, wait, but this is so warped and it's so.
What do you think that is, though, that idea of like, I want to be a part of this too. I want to be, I don't know. Like, yeah, what do you think what brings us into that? Like, why do we want to be involved? Because I think it's like innocent to a certain level, but we just want some of that love or some of that light or sympathy, a hug. Yeah.
I know it's weird because there's something too about it where it's like people also want to be the hero too. Like they want to be like, let me say the profound thing too about this person.
Right.
That's what gets me about fucking Twitter obituaries. Like I fucking go crazy. It's like, look, these people meant something to me, in a distance. But most people that are writing Twitter obituaries are like me. They don't know these people, and they're writing these things. Like, I mean, I'll just point out the one that I think is the best. Is like Kirstie Alley talking about Stephen Hawking. She's like, "We had some good times, and you knew that." And it's like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, it's like. But everyone feels like I need to say it. I need to get in there. I need to memorialize, and it's such a weird thing. Because I do think it is a little bit like, I want some love here too. If I stand on the right side of something or, on some level of it, like I want some of what you're giving to that person. I want a little bit of that shine on me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know. It's also like people are also grieving. So they're also just seeking some sort of connection. So I don't know. It's complicated.
There's always like a communal experience to trauma or to tragedy, but like but it's hard to parse out when something is input as attention or if it's just like, I want to add meaning to what's going on by sharing something personal and maybe not known.
Yeah.
But it's like that line is so blurred. And I feel like that's like Dory's whole like thing in this season too, where it's like she didn't really know Chantal that well, and yet she is like projecting so much false history on this.
Yeah.
And this is what I think I equate it to. Oh, I'm a singer-songwriter, and what a great moment for me to get up here. I can sing my song, and there's a part of it that's like, I'm doing this because I care. And there's another part of it like, oh, I think people are gonna, maybe this will, help me too. Like, and I know that's a really fucking pessimistic way of looking at things, but I do think that there's an element of that.
Yeah, it's just unfortunately it's true. And like, it's just unfortunate. Like they cannot help them. It's like, I want to, And I think there's also a lot of like, should I post this? And like, yeah, post it. Yeah. Like, no, it's good. Like, definitely. Like, and then like, is it too this? And like, no, it's not. Like I think there's a lot of proofreading that goes into it, and a lot of like, should I not? And then ultimately doing it, and then.
But then the proofreading doesn't even end up mattering once it's like posted. Yeah,
there's a performative aspect to grief. My family is Italian, and I remember one of my earliest memories was going to the funeral of my grandmother's father. And the first daughter that went up to the casket was like, oh, Joe, we love you, Joe, you left too soon. And then the second one, I remember this so clearly. The second one like gets up to the casket, oh, Joe, and grabs Joe from the lapels. Oh, Joe, why wasn't it me? Why wasn't it me? And then the third sister got on top of the fucking casket. They're like, take me with you, take me with you. And all of the funerals I went to had elements of that. And I think it is like, am I showing enough grief? Like, am I like she showed that much. So that means I have to show this much, which means if you did this, I got to write a song. And if you wrote a song, I got to write an album. And if you know what I'm saying? Like, there's this level to it, letting people know like I'm also part of that. Don't minimize me because I'm holding it in or something. I mean, and that's of course an extreme circumstance, but I do think that exists. Like, how can I top somebody else? Oh, if they're doing that, I have to do that too. I'm going to match it.
Right.
And then is the matching out of true grief, which I think sometimes it is, or is the matching just simply because you're like, oh, I got to do the same thing that this person just did, and I'm mustering that up.
Wow.
I love that. Well, I don't love that, but I mean, saying,
it's insane. It's insane. The man was an old man. He was fine. It was
no, but you're sort of giving me this imagistic like flashback, Paul. To we all flew back to rural China when my grandmother passed away, and as soon as we got there, I was expecting the whole extended family to be morose and completely like downtrodden. And it's obviously a cultural thing, but in terms of the performance aspect of grief, like that's universal because I got there and all my aunts and uncles were completely fine as if nothing had happened, picked us up from the airport, chatting us up on the way to the farm or whatever. It wasn't until the actual funeral ceremony that everybody on cue was like chorally wailing. And it was just this, it was just such a crazy like binary of we're fine too. This is the worst suffering. I mean, and they were actually authentically grieving.
Sure.
But I don't know if it's a cultural thing that like, people in Asia can like compartmentalize those things more easily.
But it can also build too. Like I think like what you're saying, like this is a terrible way to describe it, but like an improv exercise.
Sure,
like,
sure.
We're building on it. It's like, oh, we're all making a noise. And it's like, and I think it's a subconscious thing. Like we're all doing it. And I don't think it's fake.
No,
I just think it's maybe it's the permission to allow yourself to go to those places. And that's probably the more optimistic view. Like, oh, I can feel free to wail now because everybody else is wailing, and I'm not going to be the outcast here, the only one wailing.
Sure.
I can feel free to read my poetry, and then I sometimes will look at it in the more pessimistic way too. But,
Sure. Well, I mean, that's a wonderful sort of note to almost end on, which is that processing trauma is an improv exercise.
Yes, and baby.
Yes, and. Okay, this is the last question I want to ask. I think it's kind of a difficult one. Do we feel bad for any of the main four characters?
I do.
I do too.
I don't know that I do. But go ahead.
I mean, even though I'm not like, oh, they're victims, I still feel bad. Like I have love for them all and I feel bad for them all. Like I feel like we always are challenging the audience to, even though they're like not necessarily, quote unquote, I hate saying this, but like likable.
Sure.
They are still fun and like people I know and love dearly. So I feel very attached to them, and I think that they are struggling and suffering and wish the best for them, even if they have made poor choices.
Great.
Yeah, just to jump on that, I would say I definitely sympathize with them. I don't think that they're innocent. I don't think that they are without guilt. But I also feel like, sometimes when you have somebody in your life, whether that's somebody from your family, someone in your friend life, somebody that you are a partner with, they can help prevent you from getting into these spots, right? They can kind of be an outside eye that can kind of set you right. And I feel like these characters they are friends, but they're not necessarily protecting each other, right? So they didn't have that person to kind of rein it in, right? And then they kind of get more and more bonded together because of this other thing that they're all involved in. So I do feel sympathy for them because their lives are not they're not complete. It's not like, oh, they're like, how could they have made this mistake? Like, I see how they could make this mistake. I see how they could get into this world. Like the finale of Seinfeld, where, they're essentially like laughing, while this man is being beaten up. Like that is different, right? And those characters, I think that's why people didn't really like that finale was because they seem to be so mean, right? And I don't think these characters are mean. I think, yes, they can be manipulative. I think they could be, I think they could take on a lot of traits that are probably not great traits, including murder. But the idea being that like there's a humanity to all of them.
They made some stupid choices, and this is where they are.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, now I have to examine why my knee-jerk response was, no, I don't feel bad for them. But that's kind of the beauty of the show, is that it leaves room for these characters who have found themselves in multiple scenarios of wrongdoing to still be like surrogates for the audience in a way. It's like, I haven't seen someone like me commit a murder on a TV show until this show, even, I would say.
Right.
So yeah, that's wonderful. Well, Sarah-Violet Bliss, Paul Scheer, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
This was a lovely conversation about very light fare of victimhood and trauma. Thank you. Okay, great. Well, victimhood and trauma aren't themes that are generally addressed in a comedic series, but I guess that type of character development and nuanced emotional insight are what makes the show so beloved. I'd like to thank Sarah-Violet Bliss and Paul Scheer for allowing us to explore those topics and more today. Until next time, I'm Bowen Yang. Join me next week for 2 new episodes in which we deep dive into the many themes of Search Party with even more special guests. Search Party, the podcast, is a production of HBO Max and iHeartRadio. It's executive produced by Ethan Fixell, produced and written by Jonah Bayer, written and researched by Marissa Brown, and engineered, edited, and mixed by Matt Stillo. If you haven't already subscribed, rated, or reviewed Search Party, the podcast, please do so on the iHeartRadio app, HBO Max, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you might get your podcasts. And don't forget to watch Season 4 of Search Party, premiering January 14th only on HBO Max.